Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I will be starting our second session of Wazobia 2021 now. So I am expecting one more speaker to join us. Unfortunately, they're having some issues at the moment, but we will start nonetheless. So my name is Crystal Gaylord. I am your moderator for the day. For those of you joining us now, for those of you who joined earlier for the session before, I'm happy to see you again, and I hope you enjoyed the intercession. We will be talking about tapping into Nigeria's potential, tapping into potential of tech for Nigeria's future today, and we'll be welcoming 4 speakers for this session. So we'll have Madam Chioma Agwebo, Mrs. Yinka Fayomi, Ms. Sone Osakwe, and Mr. Stephen Odaibo, who will be speaking on their relevant topic. And we will be starting with Ms. Fayomi, who will be speaking of capacity and competency building. But before I go into that, let me briefly introduce the topic of this session. So this session is going to look at several things. Each of our speakers have their relevant expertise, but it is our hope that through this session, we'll be bringing all of these expertise together to highlight, as we did in the first session, concrete recommendations of things that can be done to tap into the potential of tech, of youth, of whatever it is for Nigeria's future, and move away from complaining and pointing fingers and actually bringing forward concrete recommendations. And without further ado, I will be going directly with our first speaker of the day, who is Ms. Yinka Fayomi, who is an investment consultant and chairman of the Foreign Investment Network, a UK publishing and consulting firm that produces FIN magazine, which is published in English, Chinese, and in French. As lead at FIN, Ms. Fayomi organizes investment and business events globally, promoting inward investment to Africa. She holds an MBA and a BS, Bachelor of Science in Economics, and she's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Economics. Her work with youth and with women has been recognized through awards from the Financial Standard newspaper and GC4W from Most Dynamic Nigerian Female in the Diaspora, as well as Global Women Champion for Leadership in Business and Entrepreneurship in America, amongst other awards. Ms. Fayomi is a pioneer staff and former director of the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, NIPC, and has held various positions around the world, including joining the Nigerian National Vision 2020 team, participating as a juror on the BBC World Challenge, and serving as a governor of the Brent Council in the UK. Ms. Fayomi will be speaking to us about capacity and competency building, and you have the floor for 8 minutes. I really look forward to your contribution. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. Ms. Fayomi, you're muted. Oh, okay, we can hear you. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and I'm really humbled to be here. As you are aware, I joined this session right from the beginning, because I was really excited to be part of this. Talking about youth today, we're talking about capacity and competency. First, we need to understand the difference between this capacity and competency. Competency comes when you get knowledge, you get training, professional training, you improve on your skills. These are things that you acquire knowingly. Capacity, on the other hand, is what you are made of, what is available for you in the standard environment. So now, what is happening to us in Nigeria? If we are to focus on Nigeria, we've been talking about Africa. I was part of a tech event that is looking to hire, to manage 490 million youth in Africa. But let's talk about Nigeria today. In Nigeria today, we have about 14 million youth that are jobless. Okay? And then people complain about the country. There's no infrastructure, there's no water, there's no light. But today, we have come to see that most of these problems are able to be solved when it comes to technology. You don't need the good road for technology, but again, you need the data, right? So data becomes key for the youth. When I lived in Liberia, I've had the opportunity to live in many countries. But when I lived in Liberia, it was the first time I got closer to what we today know as poverty. I haven't seen this in many of the years of all the places I've lived. And I saw real poverty. So I started an NGO to promote the youth and the women. And the youth technology was one of the things that we're having to improve the lives of youth. Now, a few weeks ago, I was speaking to youth again because I love youth and I love technology. I was talking to youth again, and they will all sit and complain. You know, the issues of youth in Nigeria, they sit and complain and complain. I say, excuse me, you cannot expect the government to do everything for you. What are you doing for yourself? Volunteerism. Do you know about volunteering? How many of you will come out of your homes to say, okay, I have no transport, I have nothing, but have you tried to start washing the cars of your neighbors and see whether after a while you don't get something back? Have you gone to offer yourself to the saloons in the neighborhood and see whether you will not be better off? When I lived in South Korea, okay, I was a volunteer. I volunteered working for the American base, American company. And when I will wake up early in the morning, especially during winter, and it was very cold and it was dark, and you will see the cats, everything black, but you can see the eyes shining. I would go to work in the morning, but nobody would ever believe that they were not paying me because I was volunteering. In our culture in Nigeria, we don't know what volunteering is. And tell me the benefits, a lot of benefits. The fact that you have met with people, working with them, I learned, they have to teach you. American system, they have to teach you. Even if you're a volunteer, you must be taught, you know what to do. I was trained, I was taught, I learned the managing human beings and interacting with Americans. If I had sat at home just watching television and changing channels, it will not be the same. The same thing when they talk about schools. I told my brother-in-law that I brought to South Korea. I said to him, go and volunteer. Something good comes from volunteering. He said, he's still crazy. How can he go and be working for no pay? But then, for those who volunteered, I was one of those who volunteered. You got the training, and afterwards, the day they want to hire, you are the first person to be considered to be hired. I was telling the youth. But some of them don't really know. If they do know, they will go. So today, I'm asking the youth, if you have nothing to do, instead of sitting complaining about the government, complaining about your governor, go and pick up volunteering because then you gain knowledge. I mean, 40 million youth have nothing to do. It's not a happy thing for all of us because when the youth are jobless, then we have situations like we have in Nigeria today. Kidnapping, stealing, harassing. I couldn't believe it. I live in Abuja as I speak. I'm in Abuja. Abuja used to be very decent, but today in the city of Abuja, where there's security, even right by the police headquarters, people are breaking into cars and destroying things, stealing things. There's danger everywhere. This is not, it's not supposed to be. So what can we do? The youth need training, some form of training. And that is why the knowledge, skill, and all of this to develop and build the competency becomes very important. One of the things that our government must provide is the infrastructure of data. Because once the youth are able to get data for as low as almost cheap and free, I believe that a lot of youth will be released because technology has come to stay. There's nothing we can do about it. I use a lot of freelancers online to do things, and I've seen that they have shown me, and I've seen myself, that so many Nigerian youth have no knowledge of technology. Simple, I'm not talking about advanced knowledge like, those big companies, but simple knowledge as lead generation. you do lead generation, you can earn $10, $20 an hour, right? But no knowledge, including myself. So when I started working with these people, I realized that we are really very far. We are really very far. But the good thing is that there's not much to do like other things. We don't need to wait for the roads to be made. We don't need to wait for so many things, electricity. There are alternative ways of electricity, and the youth can be employed. Now, I want us to look at the core reasons of competencies that we need to all have to get a good job in technology. It's basic for everybody. If we are looking at decision making, how do you make decisions? It doesn't matter if you are in technology or you are in agriculture, but decision making becomes key for everyone. Then teamwork, working as a team. You learn from working as a team. You can't be alone, working on your own and expect to improve. Then you must learn the skill of problem solving and also planning. All of this come together to make you a better person and improve on your skills so that you can be employable. Integrity is key. I know how many of us, we say we are coming at 2 o'clock, we never appear at 3 o'clock. And all of these little things, we accept it. And then we accept it so much on different layers that today it comes to stay as is true. I know of a youth that doesn't tell lies at all. Doesn't tell lies. But when it came to Nigeria, his daddy has to. So people and the society have accepted that is not a lie, but it is a lie. So we are to grow, and we continue to live in a system where integrity is not so important. It's not so important. So, however, in closing, how many more minutes do I have?
Just a few more seconds.
In closing, I would like to suggest a few more seconds. I'd like to suggest that the youth should look at volunteer. Very important. And then secondly, for those who have access to internet, they can educate themselves. Thank you.
I believe you have frozen.
Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you very much. So your second point, unfortunately, was cut over. So I think we'll come back to it in the Q&A session. So you can highlight the 2 points, because we heard the first point was volunteering. And I think the second point was about getting training, especially technology, which links very well to the topic of the session. So, but without further ado, I will move directly to our second speaker for today. And that will be Ms. Chioma Agwebo, who will be talking about harnessing tech for youth development. Ms. Agwebo, thank you so much for joining us today. Chioma Agwebo interests revolve around women, media, politics, and technology. As executive director at Tech Her NG, she applies tech solutions to societal problems, especially those affecting women. Whether it is chaperoning youth, first-time women politicians, or co-creating solutions for sexual and gender-based violence, or even curating sessions on digital freedom, security, etc. Ms. Agwebo believes that technology not applied is not useful. Ms. Agwebo's foray into advocacy began with the Light Up Nigeria movement in 2008. Since then, she has functioned in leadership teams for campaigns such as Enough is Enough, Gen Voices, Occupy Nigeria, Bring Back Our Girls, Not Too Young to Run, and now State of Emergency, GBP. She serves on the board of Plan International Nigeria and of Oxfam International, and she'll be speaking to us today on harnessing tech for youth development. Ms. Agwebo, you have the floor for 8 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. First, to confirm that you can hear me clearly before I begin. Fantastic. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Apologies, I joined late. There's such a thing as technological challenges, and there's also a thing as Nigerian internet. So apologies that I joined late. I'm going to be speaking on harnessing technology for youth development. And I think that in a context as Nigeria, or even in the context of Africa, where youth make up the largest demographic. When we say harnessing technology for youth development, we are effectively saying harnessing technology for the development of the country or of the continent or what have you. But I'll start with a little story. In July this year, I was on Twitter about maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, or maybe a little earlier, like 4:30 a.m. And on my timeline, I saw people talking about a certain spaces. Now, Twitter spaces are like a town hall, right? An audio town hall where people can have verbal conversations or voice conversations. And so people were talking about a spaces that the president of El Salvador was having. And so I, looked through a few timelines, found the link, and I joined the spaces. And what had happened was the president of El Salvador was hosting these spaces with some senior execs from Twitter and about 5,000 to 10,000 young people who had just joined in from around the world. And he was having this conversation about El Salvador adopting cryptocurrencies as one of their national tenders. And he was explaining why the country felt like this was the time to officially adopt cryptocurrency. He was talking about the benefits for the country. He was talking about the challenges. He was talking about the instability of some coins and how that might affect the country. And people then started asking him questions. Now, at some point, somebody asked him a question and he was like, I don't really know the answer to this, but my Minister for Finance and Economy is here, and I'm going to pass over to him to answer the question. And the Minister of Finance responded, and he went back to the president, and on and on and on. And I must have been on that for about 30 minutes, and he was cracking jokes, and he was having conversations. And then after a while, he said, I've just been informed that Parliament is about to make decision on this bill. So I have to go into Parliament now for the official count, but I will be back. And so he went off, and somebody, I believe was his aide, who was in the Parliament, who was on the Parliament floor, then started telling us or translating to us in English how the vote was going. About 10-15 minutes later, the vote was done. The Parliament of El Salvador had voted overwhelmingly to adopt cryptocurrencies as one of their legal tenders, one of their national legal tenders. And so they came back, had a round of conversation, everybody cheered for El Salvador, and then the spaces ended. And I remember going on LinkedIn to talk about how, whether we like it or not, whether Africa or Nigeria likes it or not, the world is going to keep on moving. And I say this because in June of this same year, our president banned Twitter. And you can liken the ban on Twitter to throwing out the baby with the bathwater, or a petulant child feeling upset about something and throwing all their toys out of the pram. Because if we remember, all of this angst about Twitter can be narrowed to two things. One, the NSAS protests of 2020, where the federal government of Nigeria alleged that Twitter was supporting the protests and therefore is supporting insurgency. And of course, Mr. President's remarks, which were put on Twitter that Nigerians complained about, reported as being, as going against Twitter's community policies. And so Twitter took down that tweet, leading, of course, to the ban that happened on the 4th of June. And the reason why I start with this story is because when we talk about using technology for advancement of young people, we have to think very critically about the environment and the context within which these young people have to operate. On this same Twitter, we have the option to receive monies, right? So Twitter has put up a wallet option, and so people can receive monies for the spaces that they hold. They can charge for those spaces. And increasingly, just like other digital platforms, their developers continue to throw up newer ways for people to engage with their audiences, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, etc. Unfortunately, we belong to a country where our government prefers to ban things that they don't understand. I'll take you back a few years when drones were popular. What did our government do? They banned them. instead of having conversations, and of course, once people started asking why are you banning drones, the conversation went to national security, which unfortunately has become the phantom excuse for everything the government doesn't understand or doesn't like. Whereas in other countries, associations were formed, right? The concept or the technology was interrogated, and then they began conversations about, okay, how up do you have to fly to cause problems, for instance, for helicopters or airplanes or even security equipment, right? And so there was dialogue. What we had here was an outright ban. Cryptocurrencies, there's quite a few countries now who are adopting cryptocurrencies as national tender. But what did we do in Nigeria? We banned cryptocurrencies. What did we do with Twitter when we stopped understanding it, or when we stopped liking it, in quote? We banned it. And so you have to think about how ready Africa and the rest of the continent is. If you look across the continent, you have African leaders banning social media. We have African leaders shutting down the internet. Organizations like Access Now continue to advocate every single day for countries to keep the internet on. I belong to the Paris Peace Forum Expert Working Group on Digital Ethics and AI. And one of the conversations we keep having is we need to create a digital bill of rights for the world, which potentially could be submitted to the United Nations, which then offers countries a guideline on how to engage with the internet. Because you can't tell me that 2021, there are African governments shutting down the internet. As a matter of fact, what African governments are starting to do is to invest in surveillance. And Nigeria is one of the countries expending, heavy resources in investing in surveillance, because they want to be able to control their people, because they want to be able to control free speech, because they want to be able to dictate what people can consume or not. Nigeria has actually spoken about, copying and buying technology from China so that we can build our own Great Wall. This is in 2021, when people around the world are thinking about ways to open up their spaces, to democratize the public sphere, where people can have conversations, where people can exchange ideas, and where people can work together to advance their countries. So all of this gloom and doom that I have painted doesn't negate the fact that young people are every single day, sidestepping or circumventing government hindrances to make good things of themselves. And I think it's kind of a blessing that I'm speaking after the last speaker, because she said a few things about young people need to do this, young people need to do that, young people are not doing this, young people are not doing that. But I beg to differ, right? Because you have to ask the question, what has happened to the young people who have done stuff? Do we actually have an enabling environment for young people to do stuff? Sometime in August or so, the government woke up and froze a number of accounts for no reason. Now, these organizations, these fintech companies, were actively engaging government for regulations or for regulatory purposes, for licensing and all those types of things. But the government just wakes up one day and, you know what, let's just freeze all these accounts. We are not going to ask these people how they plan to engage. We're not going to ask them how we hope their business will continue running. Nothing. They just, froze the accounts. Those accounts have recently been opened in the month, I think late in the month of October, because I remember that a number of these fintech companies went to court, but the judges were, we're on annual holiday. And so you have to think about, Nigeria currently has 2 unicorns, and a unicorn in tech circles is a country that has reached $1 billion valuation. Nigeria alone has 2. So we have 2 companies, two technology companies in Nigeria that have crossed the valuation of $1 billion, not naira, $1 billion. If we had a government that was actively interested in ensuring that we can leverage all that we can and should from technology, the thing to do is to sit down with those companies. If we've had 2 in the last 10 years or in the last 7 years, it means that we can have more. We keep talking about declining revenues. Of course, the biggest conversation on the lips of everyone now is the currency fluctuation, the inflation of the naira. I remember being in London in May this year, and when I traveled, I bought pounds for 640 naira. By the time I came back in June, the pound was 670 or something like that. The pound is currently trading at 780 to the naira. Any government with genuine intentions for the advancement of its people should have said, look, we have 2 unicorns. Let us sit down with these people and let's find out what's going on. Let's find out how they achieved this. Let's find out how we can platform other organizations. Let's find out how we can platform other companies to be able to achieve this. And so I have 4 tips, because I'm aware that, my time's almost done. I have 4 tips on how we can, advance young people via technology. My organization, TechHer, we have a strand of our work called digital literacy. And this strand involves just training people on how to use basic technologies, focuses on training them on how to avoid or protect themselves from antisocial behaviors online, so things like trolling, cyberbullying, fraud, scams, etc. And one of the things we continue to talk about is the fact that the infrastructure for these deliveries do not exist. For instance, we have 10 schools, or we had 10 schools in 2019, 10 secondary schools, so 10 local education authority schools, because we really wanted to go into the hinterlands. And we would go to these schools, and all of our plans and dreams for taking projectors and videos and really fun content for these children were thwarted when we found out that a number of these schools weren't connected to the national grid. So there's no electricity. A number of these schools didn't have roads to them. So we would drive up to a point, come down, and then have to enter motorbikes to get to these schools. And so you have to wonder, when we talk about we want our young people to compete, young people need to be trained. What is the type of training what is the type of training they could ever receive in those places? Right? And so we had to create playing cards to teach these kids how to just grasp some basic concepts around technology. And now we're working on another product that we're going to take to these schools on a schedule. Let me blow your mind. So this was 2019. By 2021, after the pandemic, of course, we couldn't go anywhere during the pandemic, but as the pandemic started to shift and places started to open, we went back to the Universal Basic Education Board to say, you know what, we're raring to go. We want to get back into these schools, etc. And they said, oh, you can't go back to a number of those schools. Why? Because insecurity has worsened, right? Even in the Federal Capital Territory, children are getting kidnapped. Communities are getting attacked. And so they said to us, we can't give you those schools anymore because some of them haven't opened because of insecurity. Some of those schools have been shut down. So let's think about the ripple effect of that. When we went there in 2019, there were about 70 children per class, right? And of course, I'm talking about GSS1, GSS1A, GSS1B, etc. So 70 kids per class. Multiply that by, let's say, 5 arms of one class. So that's 350 children, and that's just GSS1. And then you have to do that for GSS2, 3, 4, 5. Well, and then of course you get to the senior classes, SS1, 2, 3. So think about all of those children who can no longer go to school in the community. Think about the teachers who have now lost their source of livelihood. Think about the headmistress or the headmaster. Those people have now lost their livelihood. But also think about the addition to the number of kids who no longer go to school or who are out of school. We've heard numbers, I think, from the UN that in 2018, that number was at 10 million, 10 point something million. Think about in just one of our schools, right? 2019, 2021, think about the number that has been added to them. So my 4 points for the government, and I think I can speak to the government since the previous speaker spoke to young people. The 4 points for the government: 1, we need to have an honest conversation about, forgive my language, what the hell we're doing. Because the truth is, our kids are not being prepared to compete. They can't even compete with themselves before we start to talk about regional or global competition. So we need to have an honest conversation about what now appears to be like a chicken and egg situation, right? So do we fix insecurity so that kids can go to school, or do we fix education so that kids stop dabbling into insecurity and so that they stop getting recruited because they have nothing to do? Whether we like it or not, we need to platform that conversation, and we need to platform it urgently. Number 2, the government needs to start listening to young people, because if you look at the entirety of the continent, to be honest, we are the youngest continent in the world, but we have the oldest leaders. And so we have people trying to solve for problems that they have never experienced, that they will probably never understand. We have people trying to solve for problems using innovation that they have never experienced, they will probably never understand. And they surround themselves with aides in the same age bracket and reduce the young people in their circles to mere errand boys and girls. So there's no real knowledge coming in. Not everything should have a political solution. Some things are just, common sense. Some things are economic solutions, etc. So we need to have honest conversations with young people. How did we achieve, for instance, simple question, how did we achieve 1 billion valuation for 2 companies in 7 years? How can we replicate that? So that's number 2. Number 3, the government needs to stop paying lip service to this thing called ease of doing business, right? Look at my organization. It's a social enterprise. It took us 18 months to register. 18 months to register, right? How do you want to make Nigeria the destination of choice for people who are doing business or people who want to run not-for-profits if it takes an organization 18 months to register? And I've lived in Nigeria for most of my life, so I do have some connections that we could leverage. But even with that, it took us 18 months. Yeah. So the government needs to stop paying lip service to the ease of doing business. And number 4, the government needs to make investments in technology. Now, investments that are not politically, politically inspired. So you're not investing in things because they can help you in an election or because they can help you bamboozle people, or even worse, you're not investing in things that will spread disinformation, as we now have, with certain factions of government and their troll farms. So there needs to be.
And you have frozen. It seems to be a pattern. Every time people need to wrap up their comments, they freeze.
An intentional investment in technology, whether it is technology in a box, whether it is technology whether it's investment in infrastructure. These are the 4 points. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just taking notes in things that you have said, which are very inspiring. We've had quite a few questions come in while you were speaking, but I'll get to those in the Q&A session. Seems people are really engaging with what you are saying, both you and Ms. Fayemi. But before we do any of that, I will go to our 3rd speaker of the day, Ms. Sonia Osakwe, who will be speaking on the positive impact of fintech growth in Nigeria. Forgive me 1 second, sorry. So Ms. Osakwe is a development economist with a combined business advisory and development policy consulting work experience of over a decade. Her experience spanned both the private sector and the not-for-profit sector in different countries, particularly on the African continent. She's also consulted widely on public sector-led projects in emerging economies. Ms. Osakwe is currently a research fellow at the Center for Study of the Economies of Africa, CSEA, where she contributes to finding practical solutions geared toward reducing poverty and inequalities that ultimately promote better welfare outcomes for vulnerable groups and more inclusive societies. Her expertise includes public policy advisory, domestic revenue mobilization strategies, SDG advocacy, socioeconomic research, among other things. And before joining the CSEA, Ms. Osakwe worked as a fiscal policy advisor at Deloitte. She holds a master's degree in international development and economics from University of Bath in the UK, and she's also a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria. Ms. Osakwe will be speaking to us on the positive impact of fintech growth in Nigeria. Ms. Osakwe, you have the floor for 8 minutes, please. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Right, so I'll be speaking a bit on just the rise of fintech in Nigeria and what this means for the economy. And of course, we'll just touch a bit on what we think can be done to even harness and advance the positive impacts that this has had on the economy. So a census done by Ernst & Young as of 2020 shows that there are now currently over 200 fintech companies in Nigeria, and these companies are practically started up just within the past 5 years. And looking at the demographics of the CEOs and the owners of these companies, you see that most of them are in their 20s and their 30s. So really you see how the youth are, as it were, taking over this space. Now, there's been a lot of buzz about how this particular sector is growing. Like the earlier speaker talked about, we now have a couple of unicorns. Those are startups that are currently valued at over $1 billion. Actually, they're right now, there are now 3 of them in the country. And just to bring some perspective to that, what that means is that some of these companies that are just barely 5 to 10 years old have a valuation that is almost equivalent to some of these commercial banks that have been in existence for years. So that gives us some perspective on how much growth is happening in the sector. Another thing to also just put perspective in this space as well is that, so within the fintech sector, there are subsectors that are doing or are more dominant than others. And that's primarily payment solutions and mobile money services. And of course, those that offer lending support to customers. Now, some of the reasons or some of the things that are driving this trend really and this growth is, I mean, fintech solutions are just the ease of access compared to the more traditional financial institutions. It's just really different. And of course, the high mobile penetration as well. A lot of since the solutions are being delivered using mobile phones, this also makes it a lot easier to be able for customers to be able to access these products. And so going back now to what this means for our economy, I'll just kind of put it into different segments. One of it has to do with foreign direct investments. Another one has to do with job creation. Another one has to do with financial inclusion in terms of access to finance. And a fourth one I'll talk about is just the multiplier effects that it has on other small businesses. Now, for foreign direct investments, I mean, we've talked about how, our economy, we really do need we need to diversify, really. And this is one sector that is showing a lot of prospects in that space. For instance, between 2014 and 2019, the amount of funds that these fintechs were able to raise was over $600 million in funding. Now, as of 2019 alone, they were able to raise 2/3 of this. Right. And so, as of 2020, so 2/3 of what was raised within the period of 5 to 6 years. And that really just shows you the growth rates and the increase and the way this is really just booming. You also look at it in terms of the African space, and we're taking up even much more than 25% of the entire sector in terms of total funding that is being brought into the African tech startups, not just even the fintech, but the tech space as a whole. And so that really shows a lot of growth and also shows a lot of potential of what can become in the coming years. Now, in terms of the job space, there are a lot of there are a couple of studies that have been done, and some of the experts that have done these studies have actually estimated that in the next 3 years, the total volume of direct and indirect employment that the fintech sector will be able to harness for the country will be around 23 million jobs. Now, that's really huge if that is attainable, especially considering that there's a lot of youth unemployment in the country. And in terms of revenue, it's also estimated that they'll be able to generate 1.5 billion revenue as at that same date. Again, like I said, that's a huge, huge win for us if that is something that all stakeholders can be able to bring to fruition in the next 3 years. Now, we'll also talk about the issue of financial inclusion and access to finance. In terms of when we look at the segments of the population that we consider as low income and maybe rural, they're always considered, as small businesses as well, they're always considered high risk. And so the more traditional financial system is not as inclusive of them because it is expensive to serve these markets. But what these fintech companies are doing is they're changing the way the game is. So for instance, let's talk about access to lending. So there's a financial sector development organization in Nigeria, and they try to do an assessment of, it's called AfricaFora. They try to do an assessment of the impact that this sector has had on financial inclusion. And so for lending, for instance, on the average, these fintech companies are able to disburse 50 billion naira loans to small and medium enterprises that would, on an annual basis, that would usually not have had access to these funds if they were to go to the more traditional financial institutions. I mean, with all the need for collateral and all of that, and credit history and all that. And why fintechs are able to achieve this is they have alternative algorithms that they're able to use based on the data that they collect from users and from customers. So that's for access to lending. In terms of access to savings, there's also EFINA also estimated that these companies have allowed at least 1 million new customers to have savings accounts on their platforms. And why they're able to achieve this is that the interest or the returns on savings is a lot more than what you get for the more traditional financial institutions. So that has created some kind of lure for new customers to be able to take up these products. There's also just a general sense of affordability. It's easier to do transfers, it's cheaper to do transfers using these platforms as well. And another big part of it, so apart from the jobs and the foreign direct investments, a huge part of it really is what they've been able to do in terms of creating an ecosystem that works for small businesses, especially small businesses that are involved in e-commerce, right? So it has helped in terms of just how the payments platforms, how customers are able to pay for goods and services purchased online, and has helped productivity of these small businesses. And really, although it's difficult to estimate what the value is, it's a big game changer for digital trade and for e-commerce. And so considering all of these positive impacts that the fintech sector has on the country right now, I think the next question is there scope for further growth? And if there is, then what needs to be done to harness the potential of the sector? And one thing that is quite a lot of people in the sector have been talking about recently is the issue of regulation. Now, the biggest problem with the regulator, in my opinion, with the regulation of the fintech sector is there's no synergy between the stakeholders. Synergy in terms of, so there definitely needs to be regulation. The truth is, investors are bringing in money into the sector. There needs to be regulation. They need to have some level of trust to be able to, put in their funds into this sector. But at the same time, because the operational model of fintechs is very different from the more traditional banking and other financial institutions of the more traditional financial system, there also needs to be a balance to ensure that innovation is not hindered while trying to push for regulation.
Okay.
Now, another thing that needs to be done is there's also the issue of data privacy, right? A lot of data is being collected from customers and users of these platforms, and there's definitely also the issue of potential customers that could use these platforms, but have just that nagging thing behind to say, what are they really doing with my data? How am I sure that my data is being protected? So there definitely needs to be, again, some kind of stakeholder involvement to ensure that the data privacy becomes a huge part of what the fintech companies are doing. But again, remembering that in bringing this in and ensuring that there's privacy and trust, it needs to be done with the mindset of driving innovation as opposed to stifling growth in the sector. And I think just a very last one that I'm going to talk about is, I think there's also need to evolve in terms of the kind of products that fintech companies are bringing. So we've talked about the dominance of the payment sector, we've talked about the dominance of lending, which is great, but there's also room for products that help people to build wealth, right? So that also needs to evolve over time. But the bottom line is the boom is here. There's definitely a lot that can be harnessed from this sector. So definitely all stakeholders need to come on board. Also, stakeholders need to collaborate to ensure that the best of this sector, that we're able to maximize it fully for the country's growth. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions that have come in, and I have questions of my own based on what you have said. This was very very enriching, but we will get to those in a second. For now, we will go to our fourth and final speaker of the session, Dr. Stephen G. Odaibo, who will be speaking to us today about the artificial intelligence for healthcare in Nigeria. Dr. Odaibo is the CEO and founder of Retina AI Health Incorporated. He is a physician, retina specialist, mathematician, computer scientist, and full-stack AI engineer. In 2021, he was issued a US patent for inventing an AI system that automatically detects diseases from ophthalmic images. In 2017, he received a UAB College of Arts and Science highest honor, the Distinguished Alumni Achievement Award. And in 2005, he won the Barry Hewitt Award for Excellence in Neurology at Duke University of Medicine, where he topped his class in neurology and in pediatrics. He's the author of books called Quantum Mechanics and the MRI Machine, as well as The Form of Finite Group, a course on finite group theory. Dr. Odaibo chaired the Artificial Intelligence and Tech Medicine Symposium at the 2019 National Medical Association meeting. Through Retina AI Health Inc., he and his exceptionally talented team are building AI solutions to address the world's most pressing healthcare problems. And he is currently joining us from Houston, Texas today, which we appreciate given the time zone difference. Dr. Odaibo, you have the floor today to tell us more about artificial intelligence for healthcare in Nigeria, and I will be asking you to stick to 8 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure and a delight to be here. Yeah, you know, I was born in Nigeria. I grew up in Ilorin, went to boarding school, FGC Ilorin, and then I came to the US when I was 17. And so, you know, we have all the potential there. And it was really interesting to hear Sonia Osakwe's talk on fintech and all the exciting things that are going on in Nigeria, and Chioma Agberu's talk as well on all the opportunity to harness potential, and Ms. Fayomi also. There's so much going on there that's, you know, that we would like to tap into. We already have, you know, but because of the way the environment has been set up, largely Africa has been viewed as sort of a source of resources, and you know, it's not entirely an unethical position, if you will. You know, think about the investors that you're trying to attract, and you needing to realize that they have to secure their capital and need some form of assurance that what if somebody takes my money and runs, right? You know, that's what it comes down to. You know, in the US, there's a lot of guardrails. There's, you know, the SEC, there's this and the other, and then there's the police when it comes down to it. But a lot of security is not guaranteed. And so it's really exciting what's going on in fintech, because yes, minus the fact that almost all of these companies are Delaware C Corps, right? Let's be real. You know, from Mandela to Paystack to these Y Combinator, their investors are in America. Even the companies themselves are in America. The founder is Nigerian, but you know, sometimes you would actually find out they don't actually live there. But nonetheless, this is sort of monumental. And what we're looking for is something similar to this in healthcare, in the healthcare space. I'll give you an example. So I have a small team in Lagos, and there's something that's going on in Nigeria. You know, and we have an office there. You know, it's labor is very affordable, relatively speaking, highly skilled, and even facilities, right? Even, you know, your 24-hour electricity, 24-hour 5G internet, no problem. And our team is exceptionally talented. There's a lot of excitement in the tech space. I, for instance, I'm on the advisory board of Data Science Nigeria, and there's lots and lots of talent. There's certain levels that we haven't really reached to yet. But in terms of like entry level and intermediate level of tech, there's so much of a groundswell that is ultimately going to start to percolate upwards. And so the future is very bright. What we're trying to do what really needs to happen, and this is a daunting problem from a healthcare perspective, is to get all of that infrastructure in place so that we can start to value each other's lives, if you know what I mean. Currently, Nigeria is not set up like that, and it's really sad. When you look at how the wealth that's there, and right now it's not a lot because there's been so much waste and so much lopsided deals, over the years for Nigeria, where you can imagine if somebody comes to paint your house and then they say that they would own 80% of it, or maybe 90, and you get to own 10 because they applied paint on it one morning. That's sort of the type of deals that Nigeria has been getting for many years, and it's painful, to look at. And so right now, the way Nigeria is set up is, unfortunately, that people with talent leave the country in massive numbers. And this year, I know this was meant to be inspirational, but this is a little more doom and gloom. This year has probably been the height of that, and people leave universities. I gave a talk at the University of Ibadan. This was probably in 2019, I think, or 18, to the graduating class at the medical school. I think without a doubt, that's probably Nigeria's preeminent medical school. And I was speaking to the graduating class, and I asked them, how many people want to leave the country, or what are your plans? How many people want to stay? 100%, the whole class rose their hands up. They're ready to go. They were like, as soon as we graduate, we're getting out of here however we can. And that's sort of a tragedy, and that's sort of the reality. I was in church the other day, and there was a new member in our church, and she said she had just graduated from medical school in Nigeria. She was starting her neurology residency at Memorial Hermann Hospital. And I told her, somebody could graduate from the US Harvard Medical School and not get into Memorial Hermann. But people are being recruited out of there very quickly, out of Nigeria. So that's something that needs to be sort of like stalled. A little bit about what we do. So we've built a system for diabetic retinopathy, automatic, 3 seconds, you'll get a diagnosis. And this is a diagnosis that requires somebody who is trained, who has gone through 20 years of school before they can make that diagnosis. Our AI can make that diagnosis in 3 seconds. 35 million Americans have this disease. 450 million people around the world have this disease, right? So ultimately, thinking through what economical solutions, healthcare financing, that's a big problem. And that's a problem that I'm not here to say I know what the answer is, because I don't. But really, we have to really think very, very creatively about how to leverage this and how to improve the lives of our fellow man and woman in Nigeria. Those things are critical. There's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of opportunity, and we need to see how can we hack this fintech thing, How can we figure out what's going on here? And then how can you start to make deals? And ultimately, when it comes down to it, one thing that really resonated with me that Chioma said was that, why don't people ask? And I think that we have to address that. We have to address the elephant in the room, right? I'm all for tradition. I love to be respectful of elders. It's phenomenal. But if in a lot of ways, that is our biggest problem. Let me go ahead and say it. That is Nigeria's worst enemy. It doesn't matter who's right. It doesn't matter what the better idea is. If the big boss said this is how it's going to be, you are dead. I mean, your career is over. Your life is over, basically, if you come up against that. When are we going to say that there's no way to make progress without us addressing that issue? So on that note, I think that once we get to the point, there are places in the world, examples in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, that we're in dire straits, but everybody, all hands on deck, everybody came together, regardless of what their beliefs were, and said, we want to make progress. We want to achieve something together. If Nigeria can ever get there, I think that will be the time to start solving problems. But the truth of the matter is life is short, right? You blink and then you're at the middle of your life. You blink again and then it's over. So I think, the time is now, and, there's no problem God can't solve. So on that note, healthcare is important, and AI, the technology is here. It's available. We need to think about how to make it benefit us, because my small team in Houston has become the technological leader in autonomous AI in the United States. And so it's not a guarantee that what you do will be creating jobs and so on. The bottom line is you have to think about property rights. You have to think very carefully about how to make sure things get distributed appropriately, and education matters, right? And not the kind of education that is, practical education, which has an express goal of helping people. That type of education matters, and people need to be able to share knowledge and be humble enough to ask people that know. One of our biggest problems is that we haven't channeled our intellectual efforts towards things that can yield returns in the lives of our fellow citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it is great to hear how much you're doing with a team. I would be curious to know how big your team is.
3,
and the opportunity.
4, 5.
Okay, small team, but it's very impressive. And we have a few questions that have come in on the opportunities and barriers that you face in developing what you have developed. So on that note, I will thank you for your contribution, and I'll be opening up the Q&A section of this session, and I will start with questions for Mrs. Faroumi. We have a few. I'll try and address quite a few questions. Some will be directed to a single speaker, some will be directed to several speakers. We'll be going back and forth. So our first question was, we have a few. One is from Mr. Romanos, who thanks you for your presentation and says that you elaborated on youths having youths involved in voluntary work, but you seem to forget that volunteering works best in an enabled environment, which the Nigeria state has woefully failed. Do you agree? Would you agree that a hungry young man or woman is an angry person and may not be in the correct state of mind to rationally be able to volunteer? And how the Nigeria government should first put round pegs in round holes rather than us exhorting youth to volunteer. Ms. Fahmy, you have the floor for 2 minutes. May I ask you to be very brief in your answer, if possible?
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me? Unmute me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I sympathize with youth that are in that situation, because when you are hungry, you are angry, and really you cannot walk. Right? However, if you are a youth and you are not dead, you can still lift something. You can still do something. You cannot be hungry and stay on the bed unless you have chosen to die. But as long as you still have some energy. I mean, it's not as if the government is not to blame. Government is to do its own responsibilities, for sure. But right now, you see, in Nigeria, there are so many organizations that have come out to help the youth. There are churches, there are Islamic schools, there are mosques, and then there are philanthropists. So a youth cannot say he has no food and so he cannot walk. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I think we'll move on to yes.
So I'm sorry. So the youth just needs to know what is available for them. To be honest, in every situation, I've seen people come to me as youth, and they don't know what to do. Are you a Christian? Go to the nearby church. There are so many organizations taking care of the youth, taking care of women. Sorry, please. I'm sorry. So that is it. I don't know. Have I answered this question?
I think you have answered the question. Thank you very much. So I think we'll move on to our next question. We had quite a few come in for Ms. Agwebo's intervention. I will try to address as many as possible. So let me put 2 questions to you, and we'll see if you can answer them very briefly, if you can. So one of the questions was, with what you were saying about Bitcoin and technological currency, do you have anything to say about NFTs, as these seem to be the new way of making money in European and American continents? So that's one question. And then the second question is about social media, but perhaps I'll let you answer the first question so you can answer it properly. May I ask you to be very brief, Ms. Agwebo?
All right, thank you, and I will try to be brief. I think that NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and I think that one of the best things about them is the ability to prove ownership. I think that they're a good idea. I think that it opens Nigerians and indeed, artists and creatives around the world to new markets, opens them to new audiences, but also opens them to increased forms of revenue. Right. So yeah, definitely a good idea. As with every new bit of technology that comes around, I always advise people do your research, ask questions, don't jump on a thing when you are not completely knowledgeable about it. But yes, NFTs are an excellent idea. I think that with the evolution of blockchain, there will be more and more opportunities for creatives to trade on global scales and earn both in hard currency and in cryptocurrency. So yes, short answer.
Very appreciated. We have another question, which is about social media. I don't know if you feel like this would be within the realm of your expertise, but it is asking, do you see social media as a positive or negative for youth, as most youth now are using social media, such as Instagram and TikTok, to make money and create a platform for themselves and their communities?
So I have a master's degree in social media, so I kind of think it falls within my remit.
All right, so go ahead.
I think that social media can be positive and negative. I always say that social media can be a knife. You can peel an orange or you can stab someone. Completely depends on how you decide to apply it. As far as youth using social media to create careers for themselves as influencers or creatives or content creators or whatever, again, for me, that's an excellent idea. I say to people, if you have, and content creation and influencing is such a difficult job. Try creating a reel and then you understand how difficult it is. And some people have to churn these out every day to keep the engagement up so that they then get approached by brands to do collaborations. So I think that it's an excellent idea. And if you can do it, I just say carve a niche for yourself, because everyone's an influencer these days. There's a particular lady I like on TikTok who acts as her thing is to create characters with all the parts of a woman's body. And then she has those body parts talking to each other. I think she's absolutely brilliant. So I'd say to people, find your niche, do what makes you happy, do things that you can be consistent with, find your market, and make that money. Make that money in foreign currency, make that money in whatever currency works for you. However, of course, we know about the downsides to social media, which is trolling, doxing, and all those types of things. So I'd say, again, protect yourself. Right? Don't jump on something because everyone's on it. Seek knowledge and let that knowledge be both your guiding principle and the thing that makes you money. But yes, I'm very big on people making money. So yes, go for it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think this will link very well with our next question for Ms. Osakwe, because you mentioned how youth and the current approach to fintech, their current approach to fintech has created a small ecosystem that benefits small businesses, especially those who are dealing with digital trading and e-commerce. And we have a question which builds upon what your presentation was about. Can you tell us a bit more on how fintech will transform, if you think it will completely transform, or if it will only transform parts of the ways that we conduct business transactions at the moment? And with that in mind, are we guaranteed safe and trustworthy services moving forward?
Right. I mean, with the entire technology space and data-driven ideas, it's evolving every day. So fintech can't be left behind. So definitely, yes, I think it will evolve. Do we know how it's going to evolve? I think we just need to watch the space, really. And in terms of guarantee for trust, if I got the second part of the question.
Yes, safe and trustworthy services.
Right. So that's definitely a concern and a valid concern. It's not just for fintech, but for businesses that that are run on or based on gathering of data and analysis and all of that. So it's definitely a concern. And the issue of data governance in the country, it's something that regulators and players in the sector definitely need to work alongside with people that are involved in forming the kind of strategy for data governance and data protection to ensure that there is safety of people's data and all of the information that's being used. Now, in terms of safety and trust, in terms of service delivery and quality, again, that's where the space of regulation comes. Regulation is very important, like I said. It's because there needs to be some kind of benchmark and threshold for what these fintech companies need to do. But again, just to repeat what I'd said before, there needs to be a balance in ensuring that these services are delivered to in the customer's interest, but at the same time, innovation, is also being promoted. I hope I answered the question.
No, you have answered the question. Thank you very much. I have further questions for you from the audience, but before I do that, and I am very aware that we are starting to run over the promised time that this session would take, but I have quite a few questions for Dr. Odaibo, so I'll go to those first and then potentially come back to you. So Dr. Odaibo, thank you very much for your presentation. We have a few questions for you, some of which have come through the Q&A, some of which have come directly from the audience to the staff. And one of them is, how do we help promote the idea that AI is good? Because while the fourth industrial revolution is upon us, not many people want to move with the times. How do we get them to see that these types of changes are good and beneficial? And I think some of these people, unfortunately, are part of government.
Thank you for that question. It's a very important question, and it's one that we're grappling with, everywhere. Here in the US, I gave a talk, was it yesterday? Yes. As part of an AI summit, and that was sort of like the main topic. And the title was, how do we establish trust? It was a fireside chat. How do we establish trust in our regulated industry for AI? So it's a great question. It's a very timely question. And it's something that we're wrestling with. So on the one hand, it's such a powerful technology. Without a doubt, it's life-saving. People are going blind, not getting their exams. There's no, in all of Nigeria, there might be, in terms of practicing retina specialists, there are less than 10, probably less than 5. And a lot of African countries don't have one. So you can imagine having a technology that is able to give you a diagnosis in 3 seconds, and then, that's very helpful. But at the same time, rightly so, what if something goes wrong? How do you trust something that's not a doctor or person's standing in front of you? And so we just have to get the message out there and be transparent in terms of how our algorithms work, and help people see what the humanitarian impact of this is, especially in Africa. I think that's why I'm doing this. That's what I think definitely drew me to this initially is very early on in my career, I understood that computer science was going to be very important in being able to scale and bring diagnostics and therapeutics to Nigeria.
Oh, sorry, my microphone keeps muting itself. Thank you very much for that answer. And then I think I have another question for you, and then I'll have one final question for the entire panel. So Dr. Odaibo, what role, you started elaborating on it, but if you could perhaps relate your experience in the US to what role it could play specifically in Nigeria, what role could AI play in healthcare beyond just, the diagnosis algorithm that you have created? I've lost the question. Give me one second. What role could it play in healthcare, and how would it jeopardize jobs for the people by automatizing, a lot of things?
Definitely not in Nigeria. And that question is not. It's a great question. It's a real question, right? Because I said my team is very small. We've been able to do all this, and I'm not sure how many jobs we're going to create. We're going to help humanity. That's for sure. So it's a good question. The dynamic in Nigeria, and even more so in most other African countries, is that skilled, even though I said the medical schools are good and people are getting recruited right out of there, when you talk about, skilled healthcare expertise, it's very, very low. Like in the city where I live, here of Houston, we probably have more ophthalmologists than the entire country of Nigeria. That's for sure. And then when you talk about retina specialists, we probably have many multiples more in one town, than the entire country. So in terms of taking away jobs in Africa, that's not the case. In the US, in certain types of jobs, but what we're doing, not the whole job, but certain parts of the job, like with some of the things that we're doing, yes. This is a revolutionary technology, and it is already shaping the landscape. This algorithm we built bills the Medicare, that's the government agency, like it's a doctor. There's a code for it in terms of the service that you get. So yes, things will move around, but new jobs will be created. I just don't know exactly where they would come from, but I know that this is a time of much change in multiple industries.
Thank you very much for that answer, which I hope is reassuring. So one final question I think this would be both for Mrs. Agwe and Miss Agwebo, which is maybe a bit general, but still very valid. And this may also be relevant for Ms. Fayomi, which is, how can one use technology to help educate children when there's so many distractions that come with it? So this is to tie in the topic, which is tapping into the potential of tech for Nigeria's future. Nigeria's future is the youth, I can imagine. So how can one use technology to help educate children when there's so many distractions that come with it? Whoever feels that they want to add an element of answer, please just go ahead. Who would like to go first?
Great.
If I could go, I think I'd just say gamify it, right? I think the beautiful thing about technology is that you can use it to meet people where they are. Yeah. So if kids are playing games these days, then gamify the knowledge that you're trying to share. If kids are, if you look at Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, people say now that there's nothing you can't learn on YouTube, literally nothing. As a matter of fact, I've been taking French classes, I think, since February this year. And every now and then I go on YouTube to simulate conversations, because there are people who have dedicated entire channels to just simulating simple conversations for people to learn. Same way there's lessons on math, on English, etc., on whatever it is. So gamify it. I guess the other thing to say will just fall under the basic parenting tips, which is that, you can offer them rewards, you can offer them, you can turn it into a challenge so that they feel like they're going to earn something, or it makes it more exciting for them to get to. Yeah, but I don't see the distractions as that much of a problem. I think ultimately for me, as long as, especially when they're minors, as long as they're safe, as long as the parents understand the risk or the risks associated with engaging online, then I think that, I think that the kids will be fine.
Thank you. Does any of the other esteemed speaker want to add anything? Because I think, everyone's opinion would be welcomed on this. Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry about that. Okay, definitely in line with what Shed said, you need to be able to get the children's interest. So whatever kind of educational plan you have, it needs to be centered around what will be able to hold their interest for some time. And there are lots of resources online for them. It's just being able to identify which of them that they would have an interest in.
Thank you. Dr. Odaibo, would you like to have a go?
Yeah, please. Thank you. I was actually thinking about this, I think last night. But it's something that is by itself a skill set, right? And the jobs of the future, etc., things would sort of morph into each other. And, before you know it, if somebody was completely unplugged, they wouldn't have developed the aptitude for certain things. So I played a lot of video games growing up. And I remember once while I was in my, not that I'm recommending that, but I was, in my residency training program, my residency program director was going to show me how to do a laser the membrane behind the lens after somebody's had cataract surgery. And I sat down and I went, boop, 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 boop. And so she looked at, and I was done, and it was my first time. And she asked me if I played video games, and I asked her how she knew, and I realized that was probably a skill that I had developed, unknowingly. And so there's going to be a lot of skills that are embedded in some of these things, but probably there's greater potential for destruction than. And so it comes down to knowing what the right balance is, managing things, and as Sonia said, making sure that you are able to channel this, towards something that is constructive with appropriate balance and appropriate guardrails. Now, whatever exactly that looks like will be different from different people. And like Chioma said, making sure that these are learning tools that engage, a child's attention quite well. And so that's something that can be leveraged. And so it has a lot of potential.
Thank you. I don't know if Ms. Fayomi would like to come in and have a final comment before I wrap up this session. I believe, unfortunately, she was called to an emergency, so she might not be able to. So I will be wrapping up this session with a bit of delay, but I think we managed quite well. This was extremely interesting, and I want to thank again all of our speakers for joining us for this second session of Wazobia 2021, which was looking at tapping into the potential of tech for Nigeria's future. I want to thank Ms. Agwebo for her comments on harnessing tech for youth development, Ms. Fayomi for comments on capacity and competency building. Also want to thank Ms. Osakwe for her comments on the positive impact of fintech growth in Nigeria. And finally, Dr. Odaibo, for your comments on AI for healthcare in Nigeria and Africa. Thank you so much for highlighting what the potential of technology has for not only youth, but Nigeria and potentially Africa as a whole in the future, if only we tap into it correctly. And as Ms. Agwebo said, that we stop banning compulsively things that we don't like or don't understand, and actually try to understand, ask when we don't understand, get with the times, and look at this as an opportunity rather than a barrier. And channel things properly, both for the government, for the youth, for unemployed masses, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to thank our audience as well for engaging. I am sorry I wasn't able to get to everyone's questions, but I hope that you felt that this was as enlightening as I felt it was. We will be having a short intercession now, and then we'll be moving to our third and final session of the day. I can encourage our speakers to stay with us and engage with the last session as well if you have the time. Thank you again for joining us. We'll be having our third session on building upon resilience and heritage, which I think ties in nicely with everything we've mentioned so far. And for our second intercession, we'll be having a musical piece by Chris Obehi, which is a Nigerian musician. He's a multi-instrumentalist. He is now based in Italy, and he mixes Afrobeat, Afropunk, pop, reggae music, as well as English, Pidgin, Nigerian, and Esan, which is his mother tongue. He has a lot of activist and engaged music, and one of which we'll be sharing today right now. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in
When we talk about an Italian man get the way they express their own. An Italian man go look you. You go don't smile. You got to say capo, 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 capo. Oh yeah now. When you get the money, people go call you Oga. When the money finish, they go call you monkey. They go call you thief. They go even call you wish. They go talk say now you be back. Now we are going to talk about Oga control. Control with the power. Oga command, they command anyhow. Oga control, control with the power. Oga command, he go dey command anyhow. So wahala, then they give you. Now we are going to talk about Oga control, and you are going to reply. You are going to say, waiting I do you, waiting I do you, waiting I do you. How many?
Waiting I do you.
Oga control, waiting I do you. Oga power,